Here are 5 practices that I believe if you're at the start of your learning to draw journey, it's really helpful to avoid. 5 things that either can make it confusing to learn to draw or can actually push you in a direction where you're not going to get to where you're hoping to go. If you're not in a position to work out their helpfulness right now for you, when the time comes, you'll be able to apply this point in the most helpful way for where you want to go. Firstly, it's easy to think, it's natural to think that it's all about learning how to hold a pen, make lines that go where we want them to go. That in fact, it's not these, what I think of as technical skills, that are the crucial thing, even though they're what we see on the paper at the end. And I think this is why these can be so misleading to focus on. But rather, the key thing is to understand in some way the drawing process, what the drawing process actually is for me and for the sort of drawings I want to do. Because when I learn these technical skills, as I come across them and as I work at developing and using them, it's understanding what the drawing process is that will give me direction, what to use, how to use them. It's not so much drawing a nice straight line, although at the start that can seem as if it is the big problem, but it's in the end knowing where to put the line, how to draw the line, what lines to combine around it. These are the things that actually are challenging, these issues, these questions. Understanding what I'm trying to create from these lines and other marks that I put on the paper. Personally, I think of the drawing process as a translation process. I'm looking at one thing, whether it's on paper, in front of me, or in my imagination, and I'm trying to recreate it in another form, in a form that's created by ink marks on paper. But however we understand that process, it's important to have an understanding, because that's the place where we're going to get this so crucial direction. And also, have I achieved something adequate in this drawing? See whether it's been successful or whether I need to learn from things that haven't worked as well as I might have hoped. Now, coming to an understanding of what the drawing process is for each of us isn't something that happens overnight, but we need to continually be thinking, what am I wanting my drawing to look like? What am I trying to create? Where do I want to get at the other end of this process? This second easy to fall into mistake is that when I draw from a photo, which in all realism for most of us is how we start, that my aim is to reproduce the photo as closely as possible. In fact, that I will measure the success of my drawing by how closely it mirrors the photo as accurately as possible. I would suggest that this is an inadequate aim to have, even if photorealism is our aim, because photographs don't simply have strengths, they also have weaknesses. And if my aim is to copy the photo exactly, then at best I'm going to be copying the weaknesses of the photo as well as the things that attracted me in the photo in the first place. And if you're not sure what I'm talking about, take a photo of a tree canopy and look at the foliage. It's very hard when I look at the foliage to work out what's happening with the tree. It often looks like a wall of foliage. Whereas in life, it's quite clear that parts of the tree are closer than others. It's quite clear that whether the tree has a solid canopy or broken up clumps of canopy that are spread around the tree, that it has a three-dimensional form, that some parts are closer to us than others. But in a photo, all of this depth is flattened out. It can look like everything is on the one plane. And therefore, if I'm copying the foliage from the photo, I'm going to end up with a very flat two-dimensional effect. What I need to do is to identify the weakness of the photo, to visualize how it looks in reality, and to create the effect of that reality in my drawing. But it's not just trees this relates to. Photographs capture too much detail over the entire scene, and that doesn't reflect the way things appear in life, in reality. When I look at a scene, I have a focal point and I see that point in more detail. I tend not to see the same detail as we move further and further and further and further away from that focal point. If I want to create a sense of reality in my drawing, that's usually more effectively done by decreasing the detail as I move away from the focal point. It's not that there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but when I understand the issues and the options, the possibilities, I can make the choices most easily to create the results that I'm wanting to achieve in my drawing. I don't want to spend time and effort capturing the ability to draw the weaknesses of a photo. I find it more helpful to think of the photo as being my starting point, something to which I add my graphic creativity. The third unhelpful thing, which is very easy to do when we start to learn to draw, is to be focusing on talent, however we understand that word to mean. Chances are part of the reason I'm starting to learn is that I think I've got some sort of artistic talent, or people have told me I have artistic talent. And we often hear of the drawing or any artistic process as being a releasing of this natural talent, this natural innate creativity. I think this is a very unhelpful way to think, whatever talent may or may not be, because it takes our focus away from what I believe should be the focus, which is that drawing is a skill that we need to learn in the same way we learn any other skill. And all of the characteristics of the learning process, all the steps of the learning process, all the things that are helpful when we learn anything at all, whether it's mathematics at school, whether it's football, whether it's the piano, whether it's another language, that all the ways we can engage in the learning experience with these areas, with these skills to develop, are the sorts of things we need to be thinking of in learning the skill of drawing. Personally, I don't believe there's such a thing as talent that makes it easier for some people to learn to draw, if talent is something I'm just born with. But I do believe that for some people, on day one of learning to draw, their previous life experiences simply equipped them better for the sorts of skills we need to develop and use when we learn to draw. We may have done something earlier in our life that helped us to observe more carefully in certain ways than the average person, which happens to coincide with more helpful ways to observe something that we're drawing. Or I might have grown up in ways where I developed a more confident, risk-taking nature, personality, and that lets me experiment and try things in drawing without being so afraid of mistakes. That's a helpful way to go. But in essence, for some of us, we've already learnt some of the skills and developed some of the mindsets that are going to be very helpful in learning to draw without even realizing we were doing it. That might appear to give us a head start, but it doesn't mean that I can or can't learn to draw better than someone else. So instead of worrying about any of that, I need to be looking at learning to draw as learning a skill. This next point is, in the very beginning of learning to draw, start to employ the processes that you want to be using at the end of learning to draw. Now, this doesn't mean we can't change them, but what I'm saying is, don't say you're drawing with pencil, endlessly erase to get perfect, or what feels to you to be perfect results, unless that's the result you want. If you want to be able to draw freehand without doing lots of erasing or without doing any erasing, then don't use an eraser from the word go. If you want to be able to draw in pen freehand without any pencil underlining, then start using a pen from the word go with everything you draw. Don't start doing a pencil outline, which then you erase after you've gone over it with a pen, if that's not the way you want to still be drawing at the end. There's nothing wrong with that. I drew that way for years for my Instagram channel. But when I wanted to learn to draw freehand in ink, I had to stop that because it didn't flow into drawing differently. I had to, at that point, learn all the skills of drawing freehand with ink. And I would suggest that if you want to become proficient at drawing in pencil, to really avoid using an eraser as much as possible. I would actually suggest not even having an eraser on the table during your drawing sessions, because learning to deal with mistakes, both psychologically and in our drawing, is a really important skill to develop. And if we're not careful, we can end up erasing more lines than we leave on the paper. If when we start to learn to draw, we can visualize the sorts of drawings we want to be producing at the end, then that helps us work out the best process to get there. And the final thing that I believe it's very helpful to avoid doing, that's to copy from the work of other artists. So I'm not drawing from a photo, I'm drawing from a drawing. A lot of YouTube videos actually are this process where someone leads us to draw this line, now draw this line, add this line, add this line. While it may give us a nice looking drawing at the end, it's a very poor process for teaching us to learn to draw ourselves, to be able to create our own original drawings. Because in drawing, once we start to understand the process and to have some experience, it's not long before we learn that the real challenge isn't putting the line on the paper. It's not drawing this line and then this line and then this line. That's so much of a problem. It's knowing what marks to put on the paper, where to put them on the paper, what order to put them on the paper in. That's the challenge. When this is what I'm starting with, how do I translate that into ink on a two-dimensional sheet of paper? And when I copy the drawing of someone else, I haven't had to work out any of that. They've presumably done that already, and I'm just copying what they've done. This process of copying their drawing lets me actually draw a far better looking drawing than I almost certainly could create on my own. And because of that, it's really tempting to engage in this process of copying, because I end up with a greater degree of satisfaction with my drawing at the end. And yet, copying, while it's a skill, if copying is not where we want to end up in learning to draw, then all the effort or the time we spend learning to copy is not going to count really towards us learning to draw originally ourselves. It ends up being, at best, a little cul-de-sac off to the side, or at worst, it can lead us off into a totally different direction and causes us to give up completely. The problem's not that I'm copying. The problem is that copying someone else's drawing is not going to be a process that will take me to the place of being able to work out what to do myself, when, where, how to create my own drawing. The only way to learn to get to that place is to work at getting to that place from my own creative interpretation and thinking and process from my reference, whether it's a photo, whether it's in front of me, whether it's in my imagination. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If you've started on the drawing journey, I believe it's a truly great journey to be on. It's incredibly satisfying. It has its highs and lows. It has its moments where you want to throw everything up in the air and tear everything up and walk away. It has its moments of quiet satisfaction and pleasure. And it is a journey. Skills, anything that we learn, is a process of starting in one place and developing by some means what we're able to understand and do, and end up in another place that we couldn't have been in earlier. There is nothing more satisfying than seeing a drawing that we've created and reflecting back that 6 months ago, I didn't even think I could try to draw something such as this, let alone do something which I think looks quite reasonable. And if you haven't had these sorts of experiences already, I hope it's not long before you do. But look, in the end, whatever you draw, whatever process, whatever understanding, whatever patterns, habits, exercises you end up doing, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.